A question that I've seen quite a few times recently is if you can just jump into Borderlands 3 without having played any of the previous games, or if you should play all the other games beforehand. Before I answer that question, a quick disclaimer that the footage that you'll see in the background is from Borderlands 3, but it's from side missions and you won't really get the context of the story or anything. You're not gonna be met with any spoilers here. So in this video, we'll talk first about if you should play the other games before playing Borderlands 3, and then also discuss the order in which you would be playing them if you choose to play them. The most simple and short answer is no, you do not need to play other Borderlands games before playing Borderlands 3. Borderlands' story is something that builds up over the games, but you still get a decent enough introduction in Borderlands 3 to all the characters. So if you're mostly after the feeling of the game, the gunplay or whatever, or just the stupidity that the game brings with it, then you will be absolutely fine without playing the other games. I would compare it to watching the Avengers movies without having watched all the surrounding superhero movies that play into the movie. You will still get the fun of it, you will still get the story and everything, but you may be missing out on a lot of the finer details and a lot of the references. Borderlands 3, different from some of the other titles, also comes with a new set of main antagonists, main villains, so you're not going to lose out on that as well. That said, Borderlands 3 reintroduces a ton of the characters from previous games in various ways. And as such, I think the experience is at least enriched by having played the other games beforehand. That said, even if you want to get most references and be deeper involved in the story, I don't think it's necessary to play all Borderlands games. I'll give you a few different ways how you can go about this, either to just min-max the time that you put into it, or to get the full experience in the best way possible. First, an overview of the games that exist. You have Borderlands 1, Borderlands 2, Borderlands the pre-sequel, and Tales from the Borderlands, which is a Telltale game. While this is the order in which the games were released, I would not recommend playing them in that order, and we'll get to that. There are a lot more nuanced things regarding that. At this point, a quick reminder, if you're enjoying the video so far and you're interested in more Borderlands content, especially Borderlands 3, feel free to click the subscribe button so you can stay updated. Now, what if you want to fast path it? The game that I would recommend leaving out when it comes to the story, not to the gameplay, is Borderlands 1. Borderlands 1 was simply not nearly as focused on the writing, on the story. It's much more about just shooting things, really. And it also had a very different vibe going to it from the rest of the series, really. So if your goal is to just play for the experience, be my guest, but story-wise, it doesn't have that much to offer. You'll be all set if you just read or watch a quick summary of it. Borderlands 2 is the game that I would primarily recommend playing if you want to catch up on the story. This is the biggest piece of all these games, and it adds the most, and it will have the most references in Borderlands 3. It was the most popular one of the series. It also comes with the Commander Lilith DLC, which is the Battle for Sanctuary, which directly bridges the gap from Borderlands 2 to Borderlands 3 and kind of catches up on all the stuff that happens in between to some degree. It doesn't really tell the whole story of all the other games, but it gives you some insight that will give you a better idea of how things transitioned from one game to the next. The unfortunate thing here is that the Commander of Lilith and the Battle for Sanctuary DLC was originally free when it came out, and people got it for free, but it no longer is, and now it's, I think, depending on if it's on a sale and where you are, around $10 to $15, which honestly is very hard to justify. I think the base game is absolutely worth its price and is consistently on sale, but the DLC is, in my opinion, actually one of the worst DLCs, and I would primarily play it for the story. So you gotta have to make that choice here if you want to spend that extra money or say, I'll just watch a summary of that DLC. That might just be the better idea. And now for the other two games. The pre-sequel's goal is primarily to add more background and enrich the story of Borderlands 2. The events in the pre-sequel also take place before Borderlands 2, therefore it's not quite as necessary for Borderlands 3. The other game, on the other hand, Tales from the Borderlands, has more of a focus on events that happen after Borderlands 2, and as such it makes more sense to play that along with Borderlands 2 if you want to add a second game. So the shortest path if you just want to get the main background is Borderlands 2 straight to Borderlands 3, and if you want to have a little bit more info on some of the things and some of the appearing characters, then I would add Tales from the Borderlands. It's also relatively short. Technically, the base game of Borderlands 2 will also be sufficient here, though at this point even the Game of the Year editions are so cheap that it hardly makes a difference for most people. And I highly recommend the Tiny Tina's Assault on a Dungeon Keep DLC. While it doesn't really add much to the story except a little bit more mental background on the characters, I guess, it is just the best DLC that Borderlands has had so far. So it's super hilarious and I really wouldn't miss out on that one. But yeah, if you're not planning to opt into the Commander Lilith DLC, then the base game of Borderlands 2 is technically sufficient, because the other DLCs really don't add that much. But if you wanted to play all games, what is the right order? There are two options here. One that I'll tell you about, but I wouldn't recommend, and then the one that I would recommend. So the logical order of how the games take place technically is Borderlands, Borderlands the pre-sequel, Borderlands 2, Tales from the Borderlands, and then the Commander Lilith and the Fight for Sanctuary DLC in Borderlands 2. However, that is not really advisable, because Borderlands the pre-sequel is told in hindsight, meaning that the game expects you to already know the circumstances of everything that happened in Borderlands 2. And to complicate that even more, Borderlands the pre-sequel happens in Tales from the Borderlands. So the order that I would recommend playing it in, if you want to go through all of them, is Borderlands, Borderlands 2, then Tales from the Borderlands episode 1 to 3, then the pre-sequel happens in Tales from the Borderlands, so next you play the pre-sequel, and then you play Tales from the Borderlands episode 4 and 5. That's definitely a bit confusing. It is simply because the whole story of the pre-sequel is told in hindsight, and you want to avoid the story spoilers for Borderlands 2 that happened in the pre-sequel. And then after that's done, you can play Commander Lilith and the Fight for Sanctuary if you want to pay the extra money for that. Story-wise, that's as far as you can go, and with that I have hopefully covered all the options. Again, I highly recommend checking out the Tiny Tina DLC as well. It's just absolutely fantastic and hilarious, especially if you have any interest in either MMOs or Dungeons and Dragons or anything like that. You will love it. That's it for today. I hope this was interesting and insightful. If you're new to the channel, feel free to click the sub button and maybe check out some of the other Borderlands videos here. I have a video that covers Flag and Mose, and I will have a video for Amara very soon, and then Zane next, and all kinds of other stuff. Thank you very much for watching. DukeSloth, out.